Hey guys, Jay here and welcome to another cosplay tutorial. Today I'm going to be making Stocking Sword from Panty and Stocking with Garter Belt. So before I begin, this is version 1 of Stocking Sword. There are 2 versions that look pretty cool. They're both quite different. In the show, the animation is very dramatic and they make it curve a lot while she's swinging it, but according to this screenshot right here, it looks very straight to me. It does curve a little bit at the end here, which is accurate to that screenshot. It just curves a little tiny bit, but this is as close as I could get. The second version will look a lot more similar to a traditional katana, but it'll be thicker up here just like this one is, where it's less wide down here and more wide up here, but the overall shape is going to curve a lot more like a katana. I've seen people do both versions before and both look fine. I actually really like the katana one, so yeah, I'm gonna do that one next. Anyway, if you'd like to make this for yourself, there'll be a template that you can get to down in the description. So let's get started. I start by tracing and cutting out the blade sections of the template 3 times on a sheet of 5mm EVA craft foam. The thinnest I can make this is 15mm thick, or else I won't have room for a solid core, so I'll be using 3 layers of 5mm foam. For the inner core, I bought this long metal thing. It's some sort of key that's used to turn off water valves. But it's thin, metal, and I can bend it easily. So I bent it with the handle side on the ground, using my foot to bend it until it fit the shape that I needed. Then I used the hacksaw to cut it to the length that I needed. Then I cut out a section of one of the blades that this will fit into. The bend is near the tip as I wanted this to go up as far as possible. And here's how it will sandwich together. Next I work on the handle. This is the exact same method, but on different sizes of foam. The centerpiece that will have that cut out for the metal core is from 10mm foam. I dremelled the sides down to look nicer and then cut the channel to fit the core. For the handle details, I didn't want to just paint them on. I wanted it to have a kind of indented look to them, where the hearts and that little line at the bottom were inset. So I started by cutting the pieces out of the pattern and transferring that to 5mm foam. There are 2 parts, the majority of the handle with the 4 hearts, and then the little piece at the end that's just under that line. It's similar to a pommel, I guess. Then I traced the hearts onto some 2mm foam because 5mm is a little too deep, and I wanted to add 2mm foam inside the cutouts to make them more shallow, and to hide the inner core. For now, I'm moving on to the blade to finish it up since all that's left is gluing it together. I use 2 coats of contact cement on all of the layers and get the build for the blade all done. And I use 2 coats because the first coat always soaks into the foam, which takes away most of the glue, so I need a second coat to make it work. Also, 5mm foam is still quite thin, so you'll want to be careful when gluing long pieces together that you don't stretch out the foam too much. It'll end up warping the blade. Unfortunately, the idea that I had for the handle detail didn't end up working. It was way too hard to cut everything out perfectly enough that the hearts fit correctly in the cutouts, so instead I did it the opposite way. I used 5mm foam to cover over the center layer with the cutout for the core, then a layer of 2mm foam with the detail cutouts over top the 5mm foam. This worked out way better. And finally, on to the crossguard. One thing to note, Inkscape isn't that great, and all 4 pointed corners didn't actually come out as full points. So when you cut it out, just make sure it looks like pointed corners. So there are 2 ways to do the crossguard. I went with 2 layers of 5mm foam because it made cutting out the 3 rectangle holes way easier for me. But if you think you can do it completely from 10mm foam, go right ahead. The edges will look a lot nicer on that. Also, I made the center a rectangle on the template, but cut it out to fit your blade after it's been beveled. You can make it to the exact shape. Just remember, the little rounded part sticking out is on the same side as the cutting edge. Speaking of the cutting edge, here's how I did that. I cut the bevel off of the template and drew it on where I wanted it to go. Also, I didn't show it, but I used a Dremel along the spine of the blade to make sure it was even as possible on the back. I first use a retractable craft knife to cut as much foam off as I can. Then I use the Dremel and a sanding drum to sand the bevel into it. Afterwards, I use a grinding bit to smooth out as much as I can. I should have also used a heat gun on it to smooth it out even more, but I completely forgot to do that. I also used the sanding drum and grinding bit on the edges of the crossguard and test fitted on the blade, which now has to rest on 2 hairspray cans because the foam guard shouldn't be laid on the table. It's foam, it'll just bend. And I can now fully glue the handle in place. I already glued both sets of 2 and 5mm foam together, as well as one of the sets to the center layer, so now I just need to glue the other set on over the core. Then I use super glue to attach the top of the handle to the bottom of the crossguard, as well as this little piece of 2mm foam for what is basically the hibaki or collar of this sword. Then I use the sanding drum and grinding bit one last time to smooth out the sides of the handle the best I can. And this is what the sword looks like at the moment. For paint, I start off with Plasti-Dip spray, which honestly shouldn't surprise anyone who's watched any of my tutorials. Then I follow that up with a few coats of the same automotive primer that I've been using on a lot of props recently. It's a flat gray which makes just about every paint stick perfectly. It also dries extremely fast, like within a couple of minutes. For the white color, I started with the only spray paint that we had. I would highly advise using spray paint if you can, and here's why. That one that we had was old and really bad, so I had to make do with brush-on primer, as it was my only option at the moment. This left a ton of brush strokes that I couldn't get out. Just use spray paint that isn't old and bad, so you don't have to worry about it. To make the striped pattern on the blade, I used tape to cover over the lines on the template that indicate where each stripe goes, and cut notches so I could use them as guides to mark the blade. I marked it with a light blue colored pencil so it could easily be covered by the blue paint. Then I used blue painter's tape to mask off the white. I also de-stickified the tape by putting the strips on my shirt or on my pants and taking them back off a few times so they had less of a chance of pulling the white paint up. I did need to do small touch-ups where the blue got a tiny bit past the tape line, but that's a whole lot better than trying to go over an area where the paint has been pulled up. The paint I used is called Pool Blue by the brand Apple Barrel. It's a matte color and not gloss. The white primer was also matte. It's extremely difficult to go over glossy paint with another paint. I just used a normal paintbrush and basically went ham on the areas that needed to be blue. I also painted the inside of the heart details and that line on the handle, as well as the sides of the crossguard, all with that same blue. Then I taped off the edges all the way around the blade and painted a border all the way around that was 1/4 inch thick, as well as the back spine. This seems weird, but this is actually in the show and it looks really cool. Then the last step is to hit it with a satin clear coat. Alright, so that was the tutorial for Stocking's sword from Panty and Stocking with Garter Belt. Something that you're going to want to be aware of is, I don't know if you can see it very well, but this curves a little bit. That's because of how I placed the core inside there. I accidentally didn't put it exactly straight, so it curved, and that was my bad. It's really, really hard to see, but it bugs me, and there's nothing I can do about it. So watch out for that. Try to place it as flat as possible. My table actually isn't flat. I don't know why, but it bows in the middle a little bit. I think it's pretty old. We got it from somebody for like free, so I don't know. But things don't sit super flat, so there's nothing I can do about it. But I figured I would let you guys know so that you guys are aware that that can happen. Also, like I said during the tutorial part of this, use spray paint. Don't use brush on paint like I did. It leaves tons of brush strokes. They're really hard to see in the blue, but the white that I used was also not very good, and it left a lot of brush strokes. But if you can avoid that, yeah, you should probably avoid that. It also left a lot of clumps of paint that I couldn't get out once it dried. I even tried sanding them down a little bit. It did not work. So that's something else to be careful of, especially if you are doing the brush on paints. And then on the little heart designs here and the little line, whatever that would be called, the white did try to pool inside there and it was really hard to get out. So that's another reason why spray paint would be way better. Obviously, you're probably going to use brush on paint for the blue designs because that'll be really hard to mask off and not mess up on. So do whatever you guys want, but I would highly suggest spray paint for the majority of this. Anyway, that's going to be the end for this. If you like it, give it that thumbs up, subscribe for more, and I'll see you guys later.